on time. Just what we have been discussing about material or post-material in the first section. I think one very material element is about the lunch. So we try to stick with the schedule. So for this section, we are very delighted to have. The theme is challenges from the global south by the Subaltern and the Post-structuralist. And we have two presenters, actually two papers. The first paper is from Professor Nihal PERERA. I guess my pronunciation definitely is not right. And he's going to share with us the paper Social Justice, the Subaltern, the struggle in a small settlement in, I think I couldn't pronounce this as well, sorry about that.
Bhubaneswar.
And in India, so time's yours.
Thanks. Well, I hope I'm not overwhelmed by the first session and all the big concepts that flew across. Social justice is the foundation of my academic and professional work. This is precisely what brought me to Baptist University. I was particularly interested in the work of Dr. Tang, who is into people's geography. Since I came here as a Fulbright scholar in 2006, I have learned a lot from him, and we've edited a book on transforming Asian cities together. I'm honored to be here, and thank you for having me. And thanks for putting this conference. Urban political economy changed the way we understand social justice and the urban. Nothing lasts forever. Even critical discourses need to learn, adapt, and grow. The dominant actors representing the state and the market have also reacted to the political economy critique by resisting criticisms, minimizing potential harm, and by co-opting critics and the dissent. The state and the system are resilient, they change. If we are to fight these structures and maintain the effectiveness of social critique and movements, we ought to periodically change our approach and strategies and tactics. In addition to the objects we critique, our intellectual environment also changes. There is new knowledge and tools that we can take advantage of. We need to learn from and draw on new developments and adapt our own frameworks, tools, and ourselves. And I was really delighted to hear the morning presentations in this conference. There is no need to repeat the benefits of political economy for social justice to this audience, but I wish to touch upon a few points. Beginning from theorizing that labor produces value, highlighting that society is in conflict, and providing us with social history, Karl Marx taught us not to treat history as static, but to learn it in order to change it and create a just society. Pioneering urban political economists such as David Harvey exposed the urban structuration caused by capital and its circuits. Manuel Castells highlighted the class struggle and urban social movements. I'm not a geographer per se, so I like Castells as well. The contemporary scholars are critical of neoliberalism and argue for the rights to the city, a theme derived from Henri Lefebvre. While there is no lack of sympathy or interest among scholars, at least radical scholars, to represent weaker actors, adopting an oppositional position is a weak option, as far as I'm concerned. It could move our understanding in a terrain already mapped out by the antagonists, to quote Terry Eagleton. Whether they represent the working class or the colonized, self-appointed attempts have hardly adopted a viewpoint empathic to the perceptions and practices of the represented. Something I argued in my People Spaces article in 2009. Caution. Oppositional and scientific discourses largely occupy the historical spaces of the very same people and places which they wish to represent and serve. Most importantly, Marx did not view the working class as victims, but as agents of social change. My work focuses on survivors and not victims. What mainstream urban studies, planning, and development theories have largely failed to recognize is that people are never passive recipients of external initiatives. They always struggle within their own immediate context of constraints and opportunities to produce a meaningful life with our own particular values and goals. I'm quoting Finland, Govinda. The seeing and appreciating the carving out of lived spaces, out of abstract spaces, if I may use two concepts from Lafayette, requires at least three changes in to our intellectual frameworks. The researcher needs to look at places where such transformation can be seen, not only the transformations that victimizes people. She needs to adopt, number two, she needs to adopt appropriate intellectual frameworks for frameworks frame our view. Third, adopt a vantage point that is empathic to the powerless, subalterns, or the weak, not sympathy. Some things, like we've developed also in this transforming Asian cities. In Leonie Sandercock's words, community actors have great stories to tell, but no means of telling them except to each other. Hearing these stories requires the listener to develop empathy towards the storyteller. At the base of this adjustment is the decentering of mainstream discourses and the acknowledgement of biases. They largely marginalize the subalterns and transforms the information about them into data within dominant theories. So we need more theorization rather than interpreting this data within extent frameworks. For example, privileging the economy is a European cultural trait that was produced in a particular time and place that has been universalized through the attribution of objectivity and privileging by positioning it as scientific. This should be followed, this decentering should be followed by the diversification of our narratives and the maintenance of the unruly presence of the subjects whom we cannot fully capture, control, nor represent, although we talk about it. In other words, the voices and cultures marginalized in scientific and positivist discourses should be brought to discussion and subject to debate and critique. Hence, I focus on the difference between abstract space and lived spaces, how these differences are reconciled by both authorities and the people, and how ordinary people create spaces for their daily activities and cultural practices. Here I refer to my own work in 2009. So, let me ground this discussion in Bhubaneswar. Oops. I'll leave it for a second. Bhubaneswar, the first planned city built in independent India. The new capital of Odisha was planned in the early 1940s by Otto Königsberg. The approach constitutes an Indianized version of a combination of modernist and garden city paradigms. It rejects segregation along caste and economic lines, stresses equality and education. City plans are not unified wholes. Like cities, planning also involves conflicts and decisions such as location, scale, and the program represent such points of negotiation. Planning conflicts are evident in the landscape. The chief planner separated the new town and its future from the temple area, creating a dual city, new city and a temple city. Ironically, the chief architect adopted an abstract temple-style architecture for the main buildings of the secular modern city. Bhubaneswar was built as an exclusive administrative city with no provision of private housing. The settlement blocks, called units, are hierarchically organized based on the rank of the government employees. There was no private land market, and even the non-governmental middle class took decades to enter the city. Niharika, I will mention this name again, the private apartment complex was built in 1992. The city was built much earlier. The poorest residents lived almost from the beginning, locating themselves in various interstices of the abstract city. I focus on two locales, one on the high end and the other on the lower end. While the latter, Satyakali, is considered a basti, a word for slum in Indian, most unusual observation was the presence of so-called slums in the elite units 1 and 2, and the informalization of their own dwelling environments by the officials of upper echelons. The original plan was based on a few significant separations. important separations, especially the land users, the government employees of different ranks and different income groups. I see these separations as Western scientific more than anything else. These divisions are based on Western scientific understandings and are highly supported by the social stratification prevalent in India. India is also very stratified. Curiously, the informal settlers seem safe in units assigned exclusively for highest level government offices. The infiltrators are very poor people who live in informal houses built on road and canal reservations. The high-ranking residents also welcome their services, not necessarily the people. At the same time, the bureaucrats have also neglected, personalized, informalized their own dwellings and the environment. The government employees have hardly maintained their official residences because it's temporary, they'll leave that. Well, most buildings in India are not much maintained. However, a few in Bhubaneswar have maintained and personalized. A judge maintains a beautiful garden, while a few lower level employees have created a garden by the road, despite the lack of land for them. The neglect is complemented by most residents' extreme use of these facilities, especially subletting of rooms, sometimes allowing the occupants to build additions to these government houses. Some households accommodate people from their home villages. A minister has 30 students from his village living in his house. Few others accommodate informal support staff such as drivers and tailors who also do their private businesses but also serve the host. Here the bureaucrats have assumed power to transform the abstract space into their lived spaces. So what I'm trying to highlight is abstract spaces are not transformed just by the poor people. I mean, it happens right across the board. The separation of uses, Western idea, has not worked from the outset. There is a market between the two units. On both sides of the dividing road, which is a broad road, it has highly densified and expanded. The authorities demolish parts of it from time to time, but the vendors rebuild and add. Across open spaces, the market has extended right up to the edge of government housing. Responding to this gesture, government houses at the edge are converted into semi-commercial uses. So the officers also respond to this. In this way, the informal dwellings and vending have invaded these elite units, while the occupants themselves have informalized the residential units from within. There is a strong cultural dimension to this. For the minister, he is the only relative in the city of the 30 students who have migrated to pursue higher education. This configuration gets more intense in areas where government workers of lower grades live. Extended families are a fact in recently built apartment buildings too. Even at Niharika, many families have bought or rented several apartments for extended family living, rather than responding to this nuclear family living which was expected. There is a particular ambivalence. While most live in the representational space of high-rank residential area, most westernized residents do not like how the unit is changed. They have not seriously attempted to stop the encroachments by the others, right? Encroachments in scaffolds. They hardly view their changes to their government houses as violations. The carving out of spaces from abstract space, lived spaces from abstract space, is the base of my work on people's spaces. Others who address how spaces negotiated, familiarized, and introduced by the week include James Olson, James Scott, Goben Lan, Sanjeev Vidyarthi, and so on. Wing Ching and I are happy to add our book to this list. This provides a segue to Satyakali, a settlement established by the residents at the northern edge of the first extension to the planned city. The authorities are creators of abstract space. I'm not going to read all these things because you guys can read, okay? Authorities are the creators of abstract space. They monitor the differences between the city of their imagination, that is abstract space, and what people are doing with it. Particularly whether these violations, whether they violate the plan. In regard to self-built settlements, Their primary concern is whether they are authorized and tenable within the government criteria. According to Bhubaneswar Municipal Corporation, which does not have a reliable evaluation method, Satyakali used to be tenable, but now untenable when we were there. If it has enough power, the municipality would demolish the slum. Slum again, there. The people are also interested in abstract space of the authority. Not only the authorities, people are also interested, but for different reasons. Their interventions are best evident in the emergent spaces and livelihoods. The community is diverse. For example, 12 families from Andhra Pradesh have cows. Here the residents have built their settlement. They have found land within a canal reservation which does not command too much of authorities' attention under the radar. It was a settlement first established over 30 years ago by 5 families. It was originally named Behra Sai. The residents did not want to confuse this with another Behra Sai, so they changed it to Satyakali because it is located in Satyanagar near Kali Mandir. Very good name. Its growth was incremental but grew exponentially after 1999 after a big flood in India. It currently has 260 dwellings and the households are highly diverse in regard to income level, religion, caste, family structure and housing typology. The unit itself is built upon complex systems of economy, spatial and administrative organization and real estate migration management. The residents are poor from a middle class standpoint. From a middle class standpoint, but have established themselves the way they could. They do have their own livelihoods, organization of life, identity and sense of pride. Many work in nearby businesses, but some have their own businesses such as papad and snack industries, papad and snack production, floral design, wedding decorations, furniture production, metalwork fabrication, bookshop and real estate companies. They are thus strongly connected to the current environment, social and the physical. The community is diverse. 12 families from Andhra Pradesh have cows. It is also organized and united. The large neighborhood have smaller units organized around courtyards or anganas, maintained as open spaces by the surrounding houses. Women dry clothes and food in these spaces and plant few herbs which they share when needed. Kids and adults play cricket and card games in particular spaces which may be termed recreational spaces. There are also celebratory spaces used to hold weddings and parties and to build temporary structures for religious and wedding ceremonies. It is also a safe place with what Jane Jacobs calls eyes on the street. People are vigilant about children, intruders and potential threats. When we first went also they knew and that we got a great audience from them. The community is also self-governed by the Basti Committee, affiliated to a larger organization called Basti Mahasangh. The governance committee is made up of 20 members. It effectively oversees the settlement processes. There are seven self-help groups, mainly made up of women. These groups have bank accounts and support businesses. This is extraordinary for India, which is also not a great place for women in some sense. The main governance committee somewhat polices the community. In case of conflict, the involved parties first report to the committee, that they don't go to the police. The police is the next step. For the committee, the police takes too long to arrive. It takes a lot of energy to comply with procedures, and inviting the police into the neighborhood undervalues the community's autonomy and the committee's authority. Similarly, the community avoids dealing with government officers unless essential. Nevertheless, the community itself seeks police and government assistance when necessary and favorable to it. Most crucially, the community promotes equity and social justice through a system of checks and balances. Not only there is a women's committee, but 5 out of 10 slots in the government committee are also allocated for women, and the committee supports women's businesses through loan programs. Most significantly, the community is led by a woman, Swamprabha Sahu. The committee predates her arrival in Satyakali, but it had no strength to represent the community. The finances were in disorder and commanded little respect from the community. Swamprabha soon became the leader, although not the president, perhaps due to cultural norms. She is the powerful and most criticized treasurer, and now the committee has enough money for its wants. She is also well known among politicians and bureaucrats who matters. With a master's degree in Odia language, she also teaches small kids. She is thus well connected to the new generation and commands enormous respect. She has contributed to securing voting rights, government subsidies, infrastructure needs, and serves as government liaison as well. If all this sounds a bit romantic, which is not the story I want to convey, the settlement has its own share of problems. Several houses close to the canal are flooded during heavy rains. When the bridge across the canal is affected, the connection to Shahid Nagar and the schools are severed. There is a lack of garbage removal. The city does not pick up garbage, and not all houses have electricity. Right? The most crucial issue, however, for the residents is outside intervention by politicians, bureaucrats, institutions, and NGOs, perhaps scholars. The main concern of the residents is the uncertainty concerning the location and wonder whether they will be evicted or relocated. The politicians and the state also maintain and manipulate the uncertainty to their own advantage without giving much in return. The people continuously register in various government programs such as Rajiv Awas Yojana, although there is a lack of information about such programs. The community leaders do meet politicians and engage in small-scale political manipulations, which is made possible by the politicians concerned for the voter bank. The state also uses the people whom it considers illegal to make projects and programs work for the state. One day Swamprabha told us that the municipality will install hand pumps the next day. And funnily enough, I was standing right next to a water pipe, and I was listening to this because the community had one. 2 hand pumps were installed the next day. This was definitely someone else's need, the way I understood. When institutions have money, the government or whatever, have money in their budgets left at the end of the fiscal year, just dumping whatever is how they serve underserved communities. The authorities believe and claim that they are doing service to the basti. It's on record actually. So it all depends on whose records you see. The main issue is the lack of voice for them in formal decision-making processes that affects their lives and livelihoods. The settlers have other needs, but they receive more water. NGOs too get involved. Satyakali received pipe water through Indian Institute of Education, an NGO, the local counterpart of the British Practical Action. Yet the community leaders believe that the NGOs use them to get money and spend on their own projects, which may be at least partially true. Another crucial deprivation is the middle class prejudices against them. They are discriminated because they live in a basti, especially when they try to obtain basic needs and services such as jobs and voter registration and education. The majority of people wish to remain in the settlement long term. They have lived long, have a livelihood connected to the place, and have sense of community. Those who want to move out are mostly affected by floods or intrigued by benefits of tenure, amenities, ownership/authorization. In sum, the authorities monitor the differences between the spaces of their imagination and how people use and abuse it from their side. Their object is to reproduce the abstract space by making sure the spaces produced by the subjects are authorized, tenable, sanitized, and fits within the scheme. The people are also interested in the same difference, the abstract space and lived space. But they look for cracks in abstract space which can provide opportunity to develop uses and activities that work for them. They widen the potential of selected cracks and interstices where lived spaces can effectively be created and enhanced. As for Satyakali, the residents have built a settlement at the interstices of the larger abstract space, named it, structured it to work for them, and gone beyond. If outsiders, whether leaders, planners, policymakers, or agitators for social justice, are to be of service to a community like this, to work with them, they must observe and understand the aspirations, deprivations, and emergences from within it, from their vantage point, not from an outside vantage. External Western scientific understandings can only go so far. Most effective and feasible social justice is to catalyze community emergencies. Satyakali is not a place to be eradicated, whether through neoliberal or rights-based discourses, but a model that deserves to be supported, replicated, and improved, replicated with improvements. It has a lot of potential that can be enhanced: entrepreneurship, local governance, leadership development, spatial organization, and most significantly, social justice and equity. Upgrading is more efficient, cost-effective, functional, and participatory. It does not harm people's sense of community and place. Seeing and enabling these require the researcher to develop an inside-out approach by switching the focus, framework, and the vantage point of inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you, Nihal. It's a very interesting piece, which really illustrates the gap between the plan and the everyday practice of the people living there. In order to catch the schedule, I have, earlier made some arrangement between the two presenters. We will do all the presentation first before we take questions. So I would like to invite Professor Solomon Benjamin to come up to do his presentation on